Alright, so I'm back fresh from the Canada Cup this week, and it's time to talk about how these new rules are really working in competitive play in general. It's important to know some of the major, biggest, most notable changes to the rules are as we go into the end of the next portion of the rock competitive season, and we enter into the spring competitive season the fall competitive season. Spring, we'll jump forward in time. The fall competitive season for these new WKOs coming around. And this is more an episode for any of you adapting to the new rules and how they play out in competitive play. If you're fresh to the new rules, this episode is going to seem a little weird to you. So if you're learning with the new rules, welcome to the game. These new rules are awesome. I'm glad they're helping you out, helping you to learn the game. For those of you coming from the old rules to the new rules, let's talk about how this game plays differently. And the most important element is the beginning of the turn. We basically don't have that anymore, guys. Unless your effect strictly says beginning of the turn, or hasn't been errated out of the beginning of the turn, it's gone. It is no longer part of that portion of the turn, which has rendered a few figures that we're familiar with a little useless. A good example of that would be Peggy Carter. Peggy Carter of the Prime Common from Nick Fury Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She was a very popular call-in for the S.H.I.E.L.D. Level 7 ID card. And she's lost that oomph because her effect is beginning of the turn. ID cards are no longer a beginning of the turn effect. They are just a flat-out power action, use them. And what that means is you can't use her effect at all because at the beginning of the turn, you can only do beginning of the turn effects. So we look to that and we say, all right, so what do I do at the beginning of the turn? Well, if you play a round table, you use your round table. If you play King Thunder, make sure you pick your powers before you even take so much as a sidestep through your turn. And if you have a Joker, you're rolling your Joker die if you choose to roll them on that die. That's the ha Joker from Joker's Wild. So what we're looking at now is a much reduced beginning of the turn, meaning we have a more reactive turn. And what that means is if you guys check my episode on the ID cards that I recently did, I mentioned that you are now able to use ID cards as a reaction to something that has happened in your turn. Or you can hold back if something in your turn didn't go as expected. And all of this kind of wraps to a really cool new game that we're playing. After my experiences at the Canada Cup, I noticed that I was able to take a couple actions, line up some things, then use my ID cards. Or I saw a certain number of elements didn't go as planned, and I ended up not being able to use my ID cards. And this is actually a really good feeling that I get to plan out and react to a turn, even if I happen to make a mistake. There's not as much pre-planning on the turn as was necessary prior, which actually speeds up the turn a whole lot. I can do a thing, then use my ID card, and then do that. Or if that thing I did wasn't going to be good with my ID card, I can choose a new ID card, choose a new action to follow that up with, choose a retreating action, a more safe action. And as a whole, the whole turn itself really kind of molds into something, or the whole turn molds into something that's a little bit more familiar, a little better feeling. A few things of note: poison isn't completely useless, guys. It's not as useless as we thought it would be, but it's most certainly not the sidestepping, forward-moving power that we had in the past. At the same time, consider poison again, if you will, because it will bite you in the butt. But if you are using poison, be aware that you are triggering Colossal Retaliation still. And that's another thing to note, is that because Colossal Retaliation is in the beginning of the turn, you can't use the call-in, but you can still kind of use the call-in if you have the right guys to call in with. And ultimately, everything happens in this big chunk of a turn that we just weren't using. And we were doing a lot of beginning of the turn effects. And they were really kind of false beginning of the turn in the end. And now they're a real beginning of the turn. And it feels good. It feels very familiar too. Like, not enough is different for it to not feel like the same game. There are some nuances, some minor things that change. For instance, our original understanding of can't use has drastically changed. So if I turn to you and say you can't use a power, it's almost exactly how outwitting a power used to be. If you check in the rulebook, there's this whole thing on duration. I'm sure Amber's going to cover it in a metafix with the reaction, with the way that can't use and duration kind of functions and changes. But basically, if you manage to say you can't use a power now, and that's through either outwit or somebody's power, like Nick Fury or what's her name, Peggy Carter. It's different but the same. If that means anything to you. What else? What else is drastically probability control? You know, when they changed the certain powers that we were all whining about with probability control, I kind of relaxed a little, and you can relax. Let me tell you. I've had my Al Jordan choose support. I've had Tony Zuko use support, and that minimum 2 is just golden. Let me tell you, I'm not even worried about re-rolling. I just kind of roll the dice. If it happens to be anything more than 2 that I'm getting, awesome, great. If it isn't, whatever. 2 damage healing is pretty amazing, especially if you have to make an attack or a roll that's kind of like an attack in order to make it. And I believe that roll isn't re-rollable. So I haven't checked it in regards to fluctuating stats. Because you can perplex up the supporter's attack, perplex down the supportee's defense, if you will. That's a very dangerous thing to do, though, as a heads up, because perplex doesn't disappear as dials move. So you got to be aware of all of this, because that's another thing that changed about perplex that's really kind of important, is that I can't, I don't lose it if my dial moves, which was originally how perplex ended up working in the past. So perplexing down the defense for support, probably not such a good idea. Just PSA for you. What else is notably different? The ability, and we're going to go back to a wit for a second, the ability to choose a power that I don't necessarily have on the dial or haven't chosen with a pick a power is very strong. And if used in the right hands, can definitely go a long way. I had an opponent against me in Canada Cup choose to outwit perplex on my Al Jordan, or not perplex, choose telekinesis on my Al Jordan. And I had to look at my turn and go, wait, what does he think I'm going to do with it? Because it was an option I had, but it wasn't the option I was going to take. And at the same time, if you look at your opponent's board state and say, if I outwit this power, even if they can pick it, I'm not going to allow that to happen. That definitely goes a long way towards prepping yourself for future turns or allowing yourself to take a certain series of actions. So we get beyond that. Blade's Claws kind of feels like it functions the same way ultimately. A lot of characters with Blade's Claws really have 2 damage. It's really on those corner cases where you happen to give a character with 4 damage Blade's Claws Fangs and you're willing to possibly D3. It's honestly, I think 3 or less, it's worth using Blade's Claws Fangs. Otherwise, not a big deal. New Quake is really strong. Oh man, is New Quake really strong and scary, let me tell you. Especially with a certain number of characters that allow leap climb and single target, and the use of Quake after that leap climb. If you can line up a single target, some of those characters have a lot of damage, and it's just, oh man. And the optional knockback is a major notable change to the game that allows you to not all of a sudden lose board state because you happen to roll doubles. Knockback being a power that is fully optional, or a kind of an ability that becomes optional when you do make an attack, if that makes sense to you. All these changes in the game are these nuances are the ones that we use in the competitive game. These nuances are the important things, but at the same time, these nuances haven't really affected the game as much as we thought, with the exception of Outwit. Outwit is really, really potent in the way it works, and I'm kind of glad that there aren't as many characters that are super strong with it out there, because the potential on it is ridiculous, and it's really actually upping the stock value of characters with the power Cosmic, one of which we're actually going to be talking about next week. So, as a whole, the biggest change being the beginning of the turn has actually really changed the flow of the game, but that's really just a mental flow. The game hasn't changed enough for us to panic yet or worry about things, but it does also bring to light there are some characters out there that have a lot of potential, and there's a lot of powers out there that are becoming more and more important, and some characters that already had a decent stock value have gone up in value, and other characters that kind of just stay the same. So characters have really, for the most part, stayed the same or gone up. Nothing has gone down in their effectiveness for the most part, and I'm talking about pre-erratas. So with that said, guys, you got to give these new rules a try. You got to get some games in with them. You got to get an understanding of how they work, because for the most part, the game hasn't really changed, just on the way that you move your turn. And on that note, I want you guys to just take a couple days, practice with these new rules. Take the same teams that you've been using and practice with them, because practice will make your team better.